3 daughters vanished from society in the summer of 1852. Their father, one of the richest men in Georgia, informed neighbors they had taken ill and required complete seclusion. For 11 months, no one saw them. When a new sheriff arrived in the county and began probing, he uncovered something that sickened even seasoned lawmen. What Edmund Rutledge had done to his own daughters in the name of safeguarding his legacy became one of the most chilling cases in Georgia history. A calculated scheme involving false promises, systematic cruelty, and a conspiracy extending to the state capitol. Before we proceed with the story of Edmund Rutledge and what truly happened behind the locked doors of Clearwater Plantation, I need you to do something. Click that subscribe button now, because stories like this, true stories history tried to suppress, are rarely told, and leave a comment sharing what state or city you're reading from. I want to know where my audience is. Every region has its own hidden secrets, and your comments help me choose which stories to unearth next. Now, let's return to where this nightmare began. In a hotel ballroom in Atlanta, where ambitious men gathered to discuss the future of Southern agriculture, the seeds of horror are often sown in places that seem entirely respectable. The spring of 1852 brought unseasonable rain to central Georgia, turning red clay roads into quagmires and delaying cotton planting by nearly 3 weeks. For most planters, this meant worry and financial reckonings stretched across long evenings. For Edmund Rutledge, it provided an opportunity to travel to Atlanta for the Southern Agricultural Convention, an annual assembly where plantation owners, agricultural scholars, and businessmen met to explore innovations in farming, crop rotation, and labor management. Edmund had built his fortune through strategy rather than inheritance. Unlike many plantation aristocrats who inherited their land and slaves, he'd started with a modest cotton operation from a distant uncle and turned it into one of the most lucrative enterprises in Hancock County. By 1852, his plantation, named Clearwater for the spring, Fed Creek along its eastern boundary, spanned nearly 2,000 acres and housed 87 enslaved workers. His cotton commanded premium prices in Savannah. His credit was impeccable at every bank between Augusta and Macon, and his name held influence in the state legislature, where he'd served 2 terms before stepping away to focus on his agricultural ventures. He was 46 years old that spring, a widower for 3 years. His wife, Anne, had succumbed to consumption in the winter of 1849, leaving him with 3 daughters and no male heir. This absence gnawed at him with growing urgency. Under Georgia law, his estate would be divided among his daughters upon his death, likely fragmenting within a generation as they married, and their husbands claimed portions. The Rutledge name would fade, absorbed into other families, other lineages. Catherine, his eldest at 22, inherited her mother's quiet grace and passion for literature. She spent hours in the plantation's library, reading novels Edmund deemed trivial but allowed. Margaret, 20, possessed her father's keen mind for numbers and often assisted with plantation accounts, showing a near-masculine aptitude for business that both impressed and unsettled him. Elizabeth, just 18, had a talent for painting and spent long afternoons capturing the Georgia landscape in watercolors, her easels set near the creek. All 3 received educations uncommon for Southern women: French, mathematics, history, music. Edmund had hired a tutor from Charleston who lived on the property and provided daily lessons. In his mind, this education served a purpose beyond mere refinement. He was preparing them for strategic marriages to men who would expand his commercial network, perhaps even consolidating neighboring plantations through alliances. But the convention in Atlanta introduced a concept that reshaped his thinking entirely. The Grand Hotel's ballroom sparkled with chandeliers on the evening of April 23, 1852. Nearly 200 men in dark suits filled the space, their conversations creating a low hum punctuated by the clink of whiskey glasses and occasional bursts of laughter. Edmund stood near the refreshment table, listening to a discussion about new cotton gins, when a voice from the speaker's podium cut through the din. "Gentlemen, if I may have your attention, our next speaker comes from the College of Charleston, where he has studied the emerging science of heredity and its applications to agricultural breeding." The speaker was Dr. Nathaniel Peyton, a lean man with wire-rimmed spectacles and an enthusiasm bordering on fervor. For 40 minutes, he lectured on concepts gleaned from European scientists, ideas about bloodlines, inherited traits, selective breeding. He spoke of cattle and horses, how deliberate pairing produced stronger offspring, better workers, more efficient animals. The principles that govern livestock, Dr. Peyton declared, his voice rising with conviction, apply equally to all of God's creatures. Strength breeds strength. Intelligence breeds intelligence. A farmer who masters these principles can, within a single generation, transform his operation. Edmund listened with growing focus. Around him, some men nodded thoughtfully while others shifted uneasily. The implications hung unspoken in the air. Everyone understood what all of God's creatures implied. After the lecture, Edmund approached Peyton at the bar. They spoke for over an hour, Edmund posing careful questions about hereditary traits, the science of selection, and documented outcomes. Peyton, flattered by the attention and loosened by bourbon, shared more than he might have sober. He spoke of plantation owners in South Carolina experimenting with selective pairing of slaves to produce stronger workers. He mentioned a planter near Charleston who, over 15 years, had created what he called a specialized workforce through careful breeding. "The key," Peyton said, leaning close with whiskey-laced breath, "is controlling every variable. You cannot leave such matters to chance or random unions. You must think like a scientist, like a horse breeder. Identify your finest specimens and create deliberate pairings." Edmund absorbed every word, his mind already racing, but Peyton's next statement struck him with particular force. Of course, the ultimate experiment would involve bloodline breeding, hybrid vigor some call it, combining distinct lines to capture the best traits of each. Theoretically, it could yield extraordinary results, though such an experiment would require utmost discretion. Edmund understood. The idea was forming, bold and horrific. He returned to Clearwater on April 27, his mind swirling with possibilities. The spring rains had ceased, and his workers were planting in extended shifts to recover lost time. He rode through the fields on his gray mare, observing the labor with fresh eyes, evaluating each worker not just for current productivity, but for their potential contribution to a grander design. His gaze settled on Samuel. Samuel stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, unusually large for the era. At 31, he was born on the Rutledge plantation, son of workers Edmund's uncle had purchased in 1819. Unlike many enslaved men deliberately kept illiterate, Samuel had learned to read, likely from his mother, who worked in the main house and might have gleaned letters from discarded newspapers. Samuel never flaunted this ability, never gave Edmund cause to punish him for it. But Edmund had noticed him studying printed notices in the plantation's central yard, his eyes tracing words with clear comprehension. Beyond literacy, Samuel possessed a practical intelligence. He understood crop rotation instinctively, predicted weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, and had once redesigned the plantation's irrigation system to capture more creek water. He worked with steady efficiency, never shirking, yet never displaying the desperate energy of someone seeking favor. He was self-contained, dignified in a way Edmund found both valuable and faintly threatening. Samuel was also unmarried, a deliberate choice Edmund had made years earlier. While most planters encouraged slave marriages to grow their workforce, Edmund had kept Samuel apart, sensing his value lay in his uniqueness rather than in producing ordinary offspring. Now, observing Samuel in the fields alongside dozens of others, Edmund saw him differently. He saw potential. He saw an experiment that could secure the Rutledge legacy for generations. The plan coalesced over the following weeks. Edmund spent long evenings in his study, door locked, scribbling calculations and notes in a leather journal hidden in a false, bottom desk drawer. He wasn't recording cotton yields or market prices. He was designing something unprecedented, a systematic breeding program that would tie his daughter's children to the plantation through blood, creating a workforce of mixed race laborers who could never fully integrate into white or black society, who would have no choice but to remain at Clearwater. In Edmund's mind, the plan's brilliance lay in its permanence. These future grandchildren would carry Rutledge blood, but exist outside legal inheritance. They would be bound to the land by biology and law, unable to claim rights as heirs, yet impossible to separate from the family enterprise. Edmund would control them completely, and they would be engineered for intelligence and strength, blending Samuel's physical prowess and mental acuity with the Rutledge lineage. But the plan required more than forced breeding. It demanded a framework of justification, a narrative to shield Edmund from scandal. He needed the cooperation, or at least the silence, of powerful allies. On May 15, Edmund invited Judge Horatio Ketchum to dinner at Clearwater. Ketchum, 71, was a pillar of Hancock County's legal system for 4 decades, overseeing property disputes, inheritance cases, and criminal trials. He'd grown wealthy through strategic investments in plantations, including a silent partnership in Edmund's operation. Ketchum had no children or close family. His loyalty belonged to those who served his financial interests. They dined on roasted duck and potatoes, served by house slaves who moved silently around the long mahogany table. Edmund waited until after the meal, when they'd retired to the study with brandy, to broach his idea. He framed it as a legal question rather than a moral one. "Judge, I've been studying recent cases involving mixed blood inheritance. Curious legal territory, wouldn't you say?" Ketchum swirled his brandy, his expression neutral. "Curious indeed, also quite settled. Mixed blood children have no legal standing to inherit property from white parents. The law is clear." "Precisely," Edmund replied, "which creates an intriguing opportunity. If a man produced heirs with no legal claim to his estate, but who were bound to it by blood, he could create a permanent workforce that could never leave, never claim ownership, never fragment the property through marriage or sale." Ketchum's eyebrows lifted slightly. He was catching on. "You're speaking theoretically, of course." "Of course," Edmund said, "though I wonder if such an arrangement existed, would the law protect it? Would the participants be shielded from prosecution or social consequences?" The judge was silent for a long moment, his mind working through the implications. Finally, he spoke with measured precision. "Georgia law prohibits miscegenation sexual relations between whites and Negroes. However, prosecution requires evidence, witnesses, and a plaintiff willing to bring charges. If such an arrangement were conducted privately, with no external complaints, and if certain precautions were taken in documentation, then legally no crime would exist to prosecute." Edmund leaned forward. "What precautions?" "A paper trail suggesting something other than willing participation by the white parties. Documents indicating coercion by the Negro party. Sworn statements, perhaps, describing an attack or assault resulting in unfortunate consequences. Such documentation would protect the reputation of any white women involved and criminalize the Negro should questions arise." Edmund's pulse quickened. The judge was outlining a legal shield for his plan, and if the Negro were promised freedom in exchange for cooperation. Ketchum's smile was thin and cold. "Promises made to slaves carry no legal weight. They can be honored or broken at the master's discretion. A wise man might offer such promises to secure cooperation, then revoke them once they've served their purpose. The slave would have no recourse." They spoke for another hour, Edmund revealing more of his plan, Ketchum advising on legal protections and documentation strategies. By the time Ketchum left, Edmund had more than advice. He had a cogence, conspirator with the authority to shield the experiment from interference. But Edmund needed more than legal cover. He required medical documentation, a physician to certify the health of participants and support whatever narrative he constructed. He needed someone who wouldn't ask difficult questions. Dr. Leonard Strickland had been Clearwater's physician for 6 years, hired from Augusta after the previous doctor died of typhoid. Strickland, 42, was competent enough for routine medical tasks but unremarkable otherwise. He was also deeply in debt. Edmund learned through discreet inquiries that gambling losses and poor investments had left him owing substantial sums to Mackin creditors. On May 22, Edmund summoned Strickland to the plantation under the guise of reviewing the health of his enslaved workforce. After examining several workers in the overseer's quarters, Edmund invited him to the main house for lunch. The conversation began with casual talk of medical matters, recent dysentery cases, quinine's effectiveness for fever, common field injuries. Then Edmund shifted to delicate territory. "Doctor, I have a proposition that could significantly improve your financial situation." Strickland's expression grew cautious. "I'm listening." Edmund explained he was planning a breeding program to enhance his workforce, carefully selected pairings to produce stronger, smarter workers. He needed medical documentation, health examinations, pregnancy monitoring, birth records. He offered Strickland $500 per year above his regular fee, a fortune for a rural doctor, in exchange for complete discretion and cooperation. Strickland's discomfort was visible but restrained. "You're talking about arranged pairings among your slaves." "Among others," Edmund said carefully. "The program will include my daughters." The silence was heavy. Strickland set down his fork, his face pale. "Mr. Rutledge, what you're suggesting—" "I'm suggesting nothing illegal," Edmund cut in. "I'm proposing a carefully monitored program to produce healthy offspring who will remain on this plantation permanently. You would document everything as I instruct. In return, your debts would be cleared by year's end, with generous compensation continuing, and you would never speak of this to anyone." Strickland's hands trembled slightly. He was trapped, and both men knew it. His debts were crushing, and this offer meant survival. "What about your daughters?" he asked quietly. "What do they know that—" Edmund replied, "Is my concern, not yours. Your role is providing medical care and documentation, nothing more." 3 days later, Strickland agreed to the arrangement. Edmund now had his legal shield and medical accomplice. The infrastructure was set. All that remained was informing his daughters of their role in his grim experiment. He chose a Sunday evening in early June to gather them in the parlor. Summer had arrived with stifling heat, and even with windows open, the room felt oppressive. Catherine, Margaret, and Elizabeth sat on the velvet settee, their faces reflecting curiosity tinged with unease. Their father rarely called formal family meetings. He stood before the fireplace, though no fire burned in the summer heat, hands clasped behind his back in a stance they recognized from childhood, his posture for delivering unchallengeable decrees. "I've made decisions about the future of this family," he began, "decisions that will ensure the Rutledge name and this plantation endure for generations." The daughters exchanged glances. Elizabeth, the youngest, folded her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture. Edmund continued, his voice firm and authoritative. "You know I have no sons, no male heirs to inherit Clearwater. Under current law, when I die, this estate will be divided among you, and through your marriages it will fragment into other families. The Rutledge legacy will vanish within a generation." "Father," Catherine said gently, "we understand your concern, but surely there are arrangements. I have found a solution." Edmund interrupted. "A way to create heirs permanently bound to this land, who can never claim ownership but will never leave. A workforce of exceptional quality, combining the best attributes of our bloodline with carefully chosen traits from our labor force." The room fell silent. Margaret was the first to grasp his meaning, her face paling. "Father, what exactly are you proposing?" Edmund outlined it with the precision of a business proposal. Each daughter would bear children with Samuel, his strongest and most intelligent slave. These children would be raised at Clearwater, educated enough to handle complex tasks, but kept in legal bondage. They would form the core of a permanent, sophisticated labor force that could never be sold or lost to marriage. The daughters would be cared for during their pregnancies, attended by Dr. Strickland, and afterward resume their normal lives. The children would be raised primarily by enslaved nursemaids, with the daughters choosing their level of maternal involvement. "This is madness," Catherine whispered. "You cannot possibly." "I can and I will," Edmund said flatly. "You will comply, or you will find yourselves without a home, inheritance, or means of support. I will write you out of my will entirely, and you will be sent away with nothing. No respectable family will take you in once I make your defiance known." Elizabeth began to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. Margaret sat rigid, her jaw tight. Catherine stared at her father as if seeing a stranger in familiar features. "What about Samuel?" Margaret asked, her voice hollow. "Does he have any choice?" Edmund's expression hardened. "Samuel is my property. He will do as I command. He will be promised freedom and land of his own once the children are born and weaned. I suspect that promise will ensure his cooperation." "You're lying to him," Margaret said. "You have no intention of freeing him." Edmund didn't deny it. "What I promise a slave is my concern. Your duty is to this family." The meeting stretched another hour with Catherine attempting reason, Margaret issuing veiled threats to inform authorities, and Elizabeth weeping. Edmund countered every objection with cold logic and ultimatums. He'd anticipated every argument, prepared every response. He reminded them they were unmarried women with no independent means, that their reputations would be ruined if they defied him, that no Georgia court would side with daughters against a father of his standing. Finally, he delivered his closing threat. "You have 1 week to accept this plan willingly. If you refuse, I will declare all 3 of you mentally incompetent and have Judge Ketchum commit you to the state asylum in Milledgeville, where you will spend the rest of your lives. I've already discussed this with him, and he assures me that paperwork can be completed in a day." With that, he left them in the parlor, their futures decided, their agency stripped. The next morning, Edmund summoned Samuel to his study. Samuel entered cautiously, as any enslaved person would when called before the master. He stood near the door, posture respectful but not servile, waiting. Edmund gestured to a chair. "Sit." Samuel sat, confusion evident. Slaves were never invited to sit in the master's study. "I have a proposition that could secure your freedom and your future," Edmund began. Over the next 30 minutes, he outlined the plan with strategic omissions and calculated lies. He told Samuel his daughters needed to bear children to secure the family legacy, but he wanted those children to possess exceptional traits: intelligence, strength, capability. He said Samuel was chosen because he was the finest worker on the plantation, a man of clear intellect and strong character. In exchange for his participation, Samuel would receive freedom papers after the children were born, along with 20 acres near the Tennessee border and $500 to start his new life. Samuel listened in stunned silence. The offer seemed impossible, too generous, but Edmund's face showed only earnest sincerity. "Why me?" Samuel asked finally. "Because you're exceptional," Edmund replied. "And because I want my grandchildren to be exceptional. You'll be well treated throughout, live in better quarters, receive better food, and when it's complete, you'll be a free man with land of your own, everything documented legally." Samuel's mind raced. Freedom, land, a life beyond bondage. It pulled at him irresistibly, but doubt gnawed at the edges. Why would a man like Edmund Rutledge truly free his most valuable slave? "What about your daughters?" Samuel asked carefully. "They agree to this," Edmund said, the lie smooth and practiced. "They understand their duty to the family." Samuel wanted to believe it. The alternative, that Edmund would force such an arrangement, seemed too monstrous, even for a slave master. The promise of freedom burned brightly, overriding his caution. "If I refuse," Samuel asked. Edmund's expression darkened. "Then I will sell you to a rice plantation in the coastal swamps, where you'll work waste, deep in fever, hidden waters until malaria or exhaustion kills you, likely within 5 years. The choice was no choice." Samuel nodded slowly. "I'll do it." Edmund smiled and produced a document, a contract, though legally meaningless since slaves couldn't enter contracts, detailing the promises, freedom, land, money. Samuel signed his name in careful, practiced letters. What he didn't know was that Edmund had drafted a second set of documents, accusing Samuel of assaulting the Rutledge daughters, painting him as a violent criminal rather than a cooperating participant. Judge Ketchum had already signed them, post, dated and ready to file if Samuel became a problem. The trap was complete, built from lies and legal maneuvers, ready to ensnare everyone involved. On June 14, 1852, Dr. Strickland arrived at Clearwater to conduct preliminary health examinations. He met privately with each daughter, examining them with professional detachment while avoiding eye contact. Catherine remained coldly silent. Margaret asked pointed questions about his ethical conflicts, which he deflected with medical jargon. Elizabeth cried softly throughout. Strickland declared all 3 women healthy and capable of bearing children, providing Edmund with a written report, the first in an extensive medical file. That week, Samuel was moved from the slave quarters to a small cottage near the main house, previously used for tool storage. It was cleaned, furnished with a bed, table, and lamp, and Samuel was given new clothes and better food. Other enslaved workers noticed and whispered, speculating about what favor Samuel had earned, what role he played in the master's plans. The arrangements continued through late June. Edmund met separately with each daughter, assigning dates. Catherine in early July, Margaret in mid-July, Elizabeth in late July. He described the schedule like organizing crop rotations, his tone clinical. "You will each spend 3 consecutive nights with Samuel in the cottage," he instructed. "Dr. Strickland will monitor your health. If pregnancy doesn't result, we will repeat the process the following month until all 3 of you are confirmed pregnant." The daughters received these orders in horrified silence, their resistance crushed by threats and their father's overwhelming power. On July 3, Catherine was escorted to the cottage by Edmund himself. He knocked and ushered her inside without ceremony. Samuel stood near the window, his face a mask of confusion and discomfort. He had expected something different, not this silent, pale young woman who looked at him with despair and resentment. Edmund left them, posting an overseer, Virgil Haskell, outside with instructions to remain all night. The message was clear: no one was leaving. What happened over those 3 nights isn't something to detail. It's enough to say 2 people were trapped in an impossible situation, forced into intimacy neither wanted, both victims of Edmund's calculated cruelty. Catherine's diary, later destroyed by Edmund, reportedly contained only the repeated phrase, "God forgive us all." By mid-August, all 3 daughters had completed their assigned nights. Dr. Strickland visited weekly to conduct examinations. On September 2, he confirmed what Edmund awaited. All 3 were pregnant. Edmund's reaction was one of satisfied triumph. He immediately isolated his daughters from outside contact, telling neighbors they suffered a delicate condition requiring bed rest and privacy. Their second-floor bedroom windows were fitted with external locks. An enslaved nursemaid, Penny, who'd been with the family for decades, was assigned to care for them full-time, bringing meals, emptying chamber pots, ensuring basic comfort while preventing unsupervised exits. Samuel was returned to fieldwork but kept separate from others, still housed in his cottage, a visible reminder of his strange status. Other enslaved people avoided him, sensing something amiss but unable to articulate it. He'd become a pariah without understanding why. Edmund spent his days planning the births, designing nursery spaces, calculating how quickly his enhanced workforce could expand. At night, he wrote in his hidden journal, documenting his experiment with the pride of a scientist nearing a breakthrough. None of them, Edmund, his daughters, or Samuel, realized someone outside Clearwater was noticing irregularities, someone who would soon threaten everything Edmund had built. The summer of 1852 gave way to autumn, with cotton fields turning white and temperatures dropping from unbearable to merely oppressive. Hancock County's social calendar resumed after the agricultural pause. It was during this season that Sheriff Thomas Brennan arrived in Sparta, the county seat, to assume his new role. Brennan, 34, a Mexican, American War veteran, brought commendations for bravery and a deep disillusionment with authority. He'd served 2 years as a deputy in Wilmington, North Carolina, before taking the Hancock County position, opened unexpectedly by the previous sheriff's heart attack in July. The county commissioners hired Brennan as an outsider, a compromise between those who wanted lax enforcement to continue and a new faction of merchants and small farmers seeking real law enforcement. He arrived on September 15, settling into rooms above the courthouse. His first weeks involved learning the territory, meeting inherited deputies, reviewing court records and warrants. He quickly noted the county's wealth disparity. Massive plantations controlled most resources, while smaller farmers struggled. The previous sheriff had rarely visited large plantations, treating them as sovereign territories. Brennan's military background taught him to observe before acting, so he watched and listened, noting which names carried power. Edmund Rutledge's name surfaced often, spoken with respect for his wealth and weariness for something less definable. During a late September tavern conversation, merchant Hosea Grafton mentioned Rutledge's daughters, catching Brennan's attention. "Shame about those girls," Grafton said, nursing a beer. "All 3 took sick at once, I heard. Locked away in that big house for months. What kind of sickness?" Brennan asked casually. Grafton shrugged. "Rutledge claims it's some feminine trouble, needs privacy and bed rest. But it's strange, don't you think, all 3 at once, and no one's seen them since June." Brennan filed it away. His curiosity deepened in early October when he met Dr. Strickland by chance at the courthouse, where the doctor was filing death certificates for 2 slaves from a nearby plantation. Strickland's nervousness seemed excessive for routine paperwork. When he left, Brennan asked the clerk about him. "Dr. Strickland, physician to several plantations. Competent, but word is he's got a gambling problem. Owes money all over Mackin. Seemed troubled to you just now." The clerk considered. "Now that you mention it, yes, jumpy, but doctors see death often. Maybe it weighs on him." Brennan let it drop, but noted the anomaly. The connection between Rutledge and Strickland surfaced when he saw Strickland's buggy leaving Clearwater. On impulse, Brennan followed at a distance. Strickland stopped at Judge Ketchum's private office in Sparta, staying nearly an hour. When he emerged, he looked more agitated, mopping his face despite the cool air. Ketchum stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, satisfaction or warning. Now Brennan had 3 pieces: Rutledge's daughters in mysterious isolation, a nervous doctor visiting the plantation, and a judge meeting privately with him. Separately, they could be innocent. Together, they formed a troubling pattern. He began asking careful questions, speaking with merchants supplying Clearwater, farmers bordering the property, anyone with recent knowledge. Reports were contradictory. Some praised Rutledge as a fair planter. Others whispered of slaves who vanished after attempting escape, punishments beyond the norm, a coldness bordering on cruelty. On the daughters, reports were consistent. They hadn't been seen since early June. Church, social calls, shopping trips all stopped. Rutledge's illness excuse was widely accepted, but a few expressed doubt. Those girls were healthy as horses in spring. An elderly woman told Brennan after church, "I saw Catherine at Easter, perfectly well. Then suddenly all 3 need bed rest for months. Doesn't sit right." Brennan decided to visit Clearwater, using a pretext about a fictional fugitive. On November 3, he rode to the plantation. The approach was striking, an oak-lined avenue leading to a whitewashed brick house with columns and verandas. Harvested fields stretched wide, workers burning stubble in controlled fires. Overseer Thaddeus Porter met him at the entrance, neither warm nor hostile. Brennan explained his fabricated reason, a runaway slave supposedly seen nearby. Porter shook his head. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. We run a tight operation. Mr. Rutledge doesn't tolerate runaways or fugitives. I'd like to speak with Mr. Rutledge directly, Brennan said. Porter hesitated. He's occupied with family matters. I can relay questions. Family matters, nothing serious, I hope. His daughters are unwell, requires his attention. I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps I could pay respects, offer assistance. That won't be necessary, Porter said firmly. Mr. Rutledge values his family's privacy. Brennan's instincts screamed. The overseer's defensiveness, the blocked access, the vague illness, it felt rehearsed. He thanked Porter and rode away, but circled back through the woods near Clearwater's Creek. From a concealed spot, he watched for over an hour, noting normal plantation rhythms, but also a small cottage near the main house, separate from slave quarters, with a man standing outside like a guard. Brennan returned to Sparta with more questions. That evening, he visited the county records office after hours using his sheriff's keys. For 3 hours, he reviewed Rutledge's records, methodical land acquisitions, foreclosures he'd engineered, lawsuits resolved in his favor, often by Ketchum. A property transfer dated September 10, 1852, caught his eye. 20 acres near the Tennessee border to Samuel Freeman, signed by Rutledge, witnessed by Ketchum, marked conditional. A promise of land to a slave, timed just after the daughter's isolation began, suggested a link. Brennan investigated Ketchum, learning of his wealth beyond his judicial salary, his plantation investments, including Clearwater, and his consistent rulings favoring planters. On November 20, Farmer Amos Prout visited Brennan's office, nervous. "Sheriff, I think something's wrong at Clearwater." Prout described hearing a woman scream from the main house while hunting near the property line in late October. Not fear, but anguish. He'd hesitated to investigate, fearing Rutledge's reaction, assuming it might be a slave's punishment. "But you don't think it was a slave," Brennan said. Prout shook his head. It sounded refined, like one of them Rutledge girls. Brennan felt certainty settle in. Something was gravely wrong at Clearwater, involving the isolated daughters. But he needed proof to act without overstepping his jurisdiction. He began frequenting Sparta's Saturday market, where some plantations allowed slaves to sell goods. He watched for Clearwater workers, hoping to speak privately. On December 7, he approached an older black woman selling eggs, overhearing she was from Clearwater. "Those eggs look fresh," he said, buying a dozen. As she counted, he spoke quietly. "I'm Sheriff Brennan. I'm concerned about the Rutledge daughters. Are they truly ill?" Her hands froze briefly. "Can't say, sir. Don't see them much. But you've seen them. They're alive." A barely perceptible nod. "Are they being hurt, held against their will?" She finished counting, her face blank, but as she handed him the basket, she whispered, "Samuel's Cottage Nights." She moved away quickly, leaving Brennan with a cryptic phrase. December brought cold rain and the reality of 3 pregnant women confined at Clearwater. Strickland's weekly visits documented their pregnancy's normal progress, with deliveries expected in late March or early April. Edmund's satisfaction grew, planning nurseries and interviewing enslaved wet nurses. Samuel, however, was unraveling. The promise of freedom felt hollow. Returned to fieldwork but isolated, he existed in limbo, neither trusted by slaves nor accepted by overseers. In mid-December, he approached Edmund at the cotton barns, asking about his freedom papers. Edmund's face darkened. "The agreement is after the children are born and weaned, at least a year after birth. You'll get freedom in 1854, not before." But the paper said. It said upon completion of terms. Edmund cut in. "I determine when terms are complete. Remember your position, Samuel. You're still my property." Samuel felt the trap tightening. The vague promise was designed to extract cooperation without commitment. That night, Samuel considered escape. Running was risky. Patrollers watched roads, and his size made him conspicuous. But staying meant enduring Edmund's lies, watching his children grow up enslaved. As he weighed this, a knock came. Sheriff Brennan stood in the darkness, badge hidden. "We need to talk," he said, "and we don't have much time." Samuel feared an arrest, but Brennan's demeanor suggested otherwise. About what? About what's happening in that house, about those daughters, about whatever Edmund Rutledge forced on you all. Samuel hesitated. Speaking against a master meant punishment or death, but Brennan's concern seemed genuine. "I know you're in danger," Brennan said. "I know Rutledge promised freedom, and he's lying. I've seen the land transfer. It's conditional, revocable. You'll never be free unless someone intervenes. I need the truth." Samuel laughed bitterly. "I'm a slave. My word means nothing in court." "It means something to me," Brennan replied. "With corroboration from the daughters, it might be enough." Samuel spoke for an hour, detailing the Atlanta Convention, Edmund's heredity obsession, the false promises, the forced arrangements, Ketchum and Strickland's roles, the daughter's isolation. Brennan listened with horror. This was a systematic violation involving court officers and legal frameworks to hide monstrous acts. "I need to speak with the daughters," Brennan said. "They're locked in their rooms," Samuel replied. "Only Penny and Strickland see them." "Penny won't talk. She's terrified." Brennan mused. "Strickland's the weak link. He's paid to stay silent but lacks Ketchum's protection. If I pressure him, he might crack." They planned until midnight, knowing the risks. Edmund could have Brennan removed, and Samuel faced brutal punishment, but doing nothing guaranteed continued horror. Brennan learned Strickland's debts were paid off in September by Rutledge's account, proving a financial link. On December 22, he rode to Strickland's Augusta home, arriving unannounced. Strickland paled at the sheriff's badge. "I need to speak about your work at Clearwater. That's confidential, patient privacy, not for criminal conspiracy," Brennan countered. "I have evidence you're paid by Rutledge to document illegal activities with his daughters." Strickland's resistance crumbled. Inside, he confessed over 3 hours. Edmund's May approach, the payment for silence, the daughter's unwilling participation, falsified documents to imply consent, papers accusing Samuel of assault, signed by Ketchum. Edmund could claim the daughters lied to protect their attacker. Strickland said, "Samuel would be a fugitive. It's perfect, horrible, but perfect." Brennan had Strickland write and notarize his confession, a critical piece of evidence, though not enough alone. Brennan rode to Milledgeville on Christmas Eve, finding Attorney General Harrison Vance at home. Vance reads Strickland's confession with shock. "This is extraordinary. A sitting judge conspiring to imprison witnesses." Brennan added Samuel's testimony and his belief the daughters would testify if protected. Vance drafted warrants and protective custody orders, recruiting 3 state marshals. They planned simultaneous actions on December 27. Secure the daughters, arrest Rutledge, detain Ketchum. But someone was watching. On December 26, Clerk Wallace Dunham, who sold information, visited Edmund, revealing Brennan's investigation, Strickland's betrayal, and the planned arrests. Edmund paid $200 and dismissed him, then summoned Overseer Virgil Haskell. "We have a problem to solve," he said quietly. Before dawn on December 27, Brennan and the marshals rode for Clearwater. 10 miles out, a felled tree blocked the road. Gunfire erupted from the woods, killing 1 marshal instantly. Brennan took a bullet in the shoulder. The attackers, masked, vanished after 5 minutes. Brennan knew Edmund was behind it. He got the wounded marshal to Sparta, where he died. Realizing Edmund was destroying evidence, Brennan recruited 4 armed locals, farmers and merchants outraged by the ambush. At sunset, they rode for Clearwater. Meanwhile, Edmund met Ketchum, ordering him to file papers declaring the daughters incompetent. They were violated by a slave, Edmund said. They can't be subjected to testimony. He planned to kill Samuel, staging it as a drowning escape attempt. Ketchum, trapped by his own complicity, agreed. Edmund instructed Haskell to drown Samuel at the creek's deep bend. Haskell and 2 men took Samuel to the creek under pretense of a meeting. They attacked, dragging him into the water. Samuel fought, but as consciousness faded, gunshots rang out. Brennan and his men arrived, shooting one overseer and capturing another. Brennan pulled Samuel from the creek. "We're ending this tonight," he said. They stormed the main house, breaking the door. Edmund sat calmly in his study. "This is illegal entry," he said. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and false imprisonment." Brennan replied. Samuel directed them to the daughters' locked rooms. Catherine, Margaret, and Elizabeth, heavily pregnant, sat in terror and hope. "Are you here to help us?" Catherine asked. "Yes," Brennan said. "You're safe now." The trial began February 14, 1853 in Milledgeville, moved from Hancock County to avoid bias. Ketchum faced separate charges. The prosecution presented Strickland's confession, Samuel's testimony, and the daughters' detailed accounts of threats and imprisonment. The defense claimed Edmund acted unconventionally but legally, with the daughters' initial consent and Samuel's agreement for freedom. The 9-day trial divided public opinion. On February 23, Edmund was convicted of false imprisonment and conspiracy, acquitted of attempted murder. He received 12 years. Ketchum got 8 years for misconduct and conspiracy. Strickland's cooperation earned a suspended sentence. He lost his license and moved to Alabama. The daughters gave birth in March and April 1008. 153 boys and a girl named Thomas, Hope, and Samuel. They kept the children, sold Clearwater, and moved to Charleston, raising them as a family, never marrying. Samuel gained freedom and compensation, moving to Ohio as a carpenter until 1891. Brennan served as sheriff another decade, uncomfortable with his fame. Edmund died in prison in 1859, unrepentant. The case remained controversial, exposing patriarchal power's limits, but also the unprosecuted abuses against enslaved victims. The children integrated into Northern society as best they could. Thomas became a teacher, Hope married a merchant, Samuel a minister and advocate. Clearwater was subdivided, its house burned in 1867. Today, few in Hancock County know the Rutledge case, buried in archives. It reminds us how unchecked power turns cruelty into horror, and how institutions can enable evil when prioritizing wealth over justice. Edmund's legacy, meant to endure, became synonymous with monstrosity. His experiment produced only trauma. Perhaps the lesson is that some legacies deserve to die, and those we enslave, by chains or blood, ultimately tell the true story of who we were. What do you think of this story? Do you believe all of Edmund Rutledge's actions were fully revealed, or could darker secrets remain buried at Clearwater? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this and want more historical horror, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who appreciates America's darkest history. Until next time, the past is never as distant as we'd like.